And there we go. So now let's get going. Greetings to one and all. And welcome to this week's net. Those wishing to join this net using Zoom may do so now as Zoom is open. My apologies. If you do not have the Zoom link, please contact me on WhatsApp 082-859-2684, and I will send you the link with the greatest of pleasure. Today is Sunday, 10 December 2023, and the time is 19:05, and we begin the weekly net with the radio amateur check-ins on the Roodepoort repeater, which normally runs 5 minutes before we start with the actual net. This net is broadcast every Sunday evening starting at 1900, and it's broadcast for the benefit of radio amateurs, disaster relief CERT volunteers, and members of the general public. This net is therefore open to all interested parties. Everyone is welcome to participate using either amateur radio, Zoom, or both. And I'd like to remind all the radio amateurs who have not checked in that you do not need to be a member of any group or club to check in or to use the repeater or any of the amateur radio bands. All that is required from you is that you have a valid amateur radio license issued by ICASA, which automatically grants you the right to use any of the amateur radio bands at any time. There's no need to ask for or be granted permission from anyone to use the repeaters or amateur radio bands. I'd also like to encourage all the listeners and participants to share the weekly net Zoom link with everyone they know throughout South Africa. Doing so will also help us grow the weekly net and will contribute to disseminating information as far and wide as possible. Okay, so I've got to wet the throat a bit. Right, so it is now time to unpack the weekly COVID-19 figures. Yeah, I must tell you, with the shutdown of all the other websites, only the World Health Organization is still publishing weekly figures, give or take, every week. So globally, we sit at 772,138,818 cases, which were reported as at the 6th of December, compared to the 772,052,000 cases. This week, we see an increase of 86,066 new cases, whereas the previous week, we actually had 41,588 cases. The global death toll now stands at 6,985,964 cases compared to the previous week's 6,985,278. So the death toll this week definitely did drop quite considerably, showing or reflecting 686 deaths compared to the previous week of 5,492. Moving on to Mpox. Yeah, Mpox figures did come through this week. So as at 1 December 2023, we saw 92,182 cases in total, compared to the 91,973. This is an increase of 209,000 compared to the previous week's increase of 139. So that is also up. South Africa's figures are still standing at 5. And of course, there's no further info from South Africa at all. On measles, following the outbreak of measles, I'm now including these weekly figures in the interest of public health. And again, this week, we did see figures being brought through. Basically, as at the 5th of December, South Africa has 1,317 cases of measles compared to the previous week's 1,217. That's 100 new cases this week alone. Limpopo is still leading the pack at 532 compared to 531 on the last figures are reported. followed closely by the Northwest with 226 cases, actually compared to 222 of the previous week. Actually, I just noticed Limpopo has now been followed by Gauteng with 256 cases. So Gauteng is in number 2 spot and Northwest in number 3. So Gauteng this week sees 32 new cases having been reported. It also appears the NRCD is only issuing the monthly stats now. So they seem to be doing it sort of in this second week of each month, which is figures up until more or less the end of the previous month. So we must just monitor that moving forward. I noticed on this week's report that the NRCD is also reporting on rubella, otherwise known as German measles. So maybe they decided to move this over to a monthly statistic and provide information on both. And for those of you that don't know, German measles or rubella is a contagious disease caused by a virus. Most people who get rubella usually have a mild illness with symptoms that include a low-grade fever, sore throat, and a rash that starts on the face and then spreads to the rest of the body. So for simplicity's sake, I will only include the totals of each province. Eastern Cape, 36. Free State, 1. Gauteng, 14. KZN, 2. Limpopo, 5. Mpumalanga, 4. Northwest, 8. Northern Cape, 120. And sad to say, the Western Cape is sitting at 466 cases. That brings us to a total of 656 cases globally. Not globally, nationally at least. Okay, now moving on under general news and all other news. This week I want to continue with a quote from the ICRC, or the International Committee of the Red Cross blog, which of course is located at https://blogs.icrc.org /law-and-policy. And this, of course, is the humanitarian law and policy website of the ICRC. So this week, we are going to basically have a look at part 2 of the document that was published on the 2nd of November, 2023. Now, last week, my last paragraph that I quoted was as follows, and I quote, "The basic IHL principles governing the conduct of hostilities, such as the principle of distinction, the principle of proportionality, and the principle of precaution, therefore apply to military space activities conducted in the context of an armed conflict and are examined here." And of course, the topic of this particular blog is how international humanitarian law will be considered in terms of conflict in outer space. Now, this week we will continue and look specifically at what the first of the 3 principles that were mentioned in the closing paragraph of last week, being the 3 principles. Number 1, principle of distinction; 2, proportionality; and 3, precaution. This week, we are going to cover the topic, or the first principle of distinction. So let me quote. "The principle of distinction obliges parties to a conflict to distinguish at all times between military objectives and civilian objects, as well as between combatants and civilians, and to direct operations only against military objectives." And this, of course, is Article 48 of the Additional Protocol number 1. It is recognized by the International Court of Justice, or the ICJ, as a cardinal principle of IHL. Nuclear weapons opinion, paragraph 78 to 79, and forms part of the customary international law, or otherwise known as customary IHL rules 1 and 7 in particular. Distinction between military objectives and civilian objects, space, whose use is categorized by the dual use of space systems, poses a specific challenge to the distinction between military objectives and civilian objects. Article 52, subparagraph 2, or subarticle 2 of the additional protocol, first additional protocol, defines military objectives as objects which by their nature, their location, their purpose, or use make an effective contribution to military action and whose total or partial destruction, capture, or neutralization in the circumstances ruling at the time offers a definitive or definite military objective. Civilian objects are all those that are not military objectives. They are protected from being attacked during armed conflicts. And of course, from the additional protocol, the first additional protocol, that's Article 52, subparagraph 1. The reliance on commercial satellites and commercial providers to support military activities is widespread. Most commercial space systems serve military and civilian purposes simultaneously, often referred to as dual use, providing services to the civilian population and militaries alike, such as communications or products of commercial space systems used by the military, including imagery and data from Earth observation satellites. A dual-use commercial satellite may become a military objective only if the above-mentioned cumulative conditions set up by Article 52, subparagraph 2 of the first protocol are met. That is, if its use effectively contributes to military action, and if its total or partial destruction, capture, or neutralization offers a definite military advantage in the circumstances ruling at the time, in spite of its concurrent civilian use, purpose, or nature. In this case, any attack against the dual-use commercial satellite would remain governed by the prohibitions of indiscriminate attacks and the principles of proportionality and precautions in attack under international humanitarian law. This raises other questions, such as whether the space system as a whole, or only a part that contributes to the military action, can be legitimately attacked. The answer to this question, but let me try that again, my apologies. The answer to this question merits a thorough case-by-case analysis of the definite military advantage offered by its destruction, capture, or neutralization, and a careful application of the principles of proportionality and precautions examined below. Okay, so that concludes part 2 for this week. We will continue with part 3 next week. And of course, this does raise some serious questions now, especially on with regards to dual use satellites, for example, and as to whether or not they can in actual fact be attacked. And of course, if they can be, if all 3 of the principles are in actual fact weighed in and considered, carefully considered, then it could mean that the commercial citizen, civilian aspect of that satellite, or the satellite system as a whole, could in actual fact be neutralized or even destroyed, which would of course have an impact on our civilian society, especially when it does come to radio communications. And that's actually a very interesting point that has just popped up in my head, which means that I need to start asking the question, is it time for us to start relying on satellite communications? Yes or no? If this is a potential risk. And if the answer, well, either way, if it is yes or no, the question, I think the next question that should be asked is what is the alternate in the event we are relying on satellite communication and that communication system is dual used by and for military purposes and is subsequently destroyed? What are our alternate means of communicating using that satellite equipment? Okay, so that being said, as I say, we will continue next week with part 3, city power, load shedding, ESCOM permitting, but we will continue. So in closing, I'd like to encourage everyone to register as a disaster relief cert volunteer and to prepare and train to assist local communities for when disaster strikes. And of course, you can always look us up by visiting https:// disaster relief cert, which is Charlie Echo Romeo Tango.org.za, or just contact me directly on WhatsApp. Now, let's have a look. Are there any other radio amateurs that are listening that would like to be added to this week's checking list? If not, I will proceed and do the final shutdown. Okay, nothing else here. Drinking cold coffee, and of course, I spilled all over myself now. Doesn't look as though anybody else is out there to check in. I would like to thank all those who have checked in this week, as well as to Christelle and Pia for joining me tonight on Zoom. And as the COVID-19 pandemic is still ongoing and is still infecting thousands weekly, please remember to physically distance yourself and to wear a mask to protect others, especially the elderly who could lose their lives if infected with COVID-19. And remember, it's always best to sanitize or wash your hands on a regular basis in any event. Doing so will assist in stopping the spread of other respiratory diseases as well. So for the week moving forward, be safe, be prepared, and of course, be happy. This is ZS6 Oscar Papa Sierra now releasing the Report repeater for general use. Cheers all. You unmute.